So this is going to be from Unit 1. This is going to be 1.2 quadratic equations and 1.4 factorable equations. So first question is solve the following equation by factoring. One of the things we pick up on this is called a degree 2 equation because of the exponent of the x squared. So remember, this is degree 1 and this is a degree 2 term. But since the highest degree is degree 2, this is described as a degree 2 equation. Degree 2 equations are also called quadratic. So sometimes you'll see this phrase quadratic. So quadratic means we're talking about a degree 2 equation. Now, one of the things we learned is the degree tells you how many possible solutions there are. Since this is a degree 2, there are 2 possible solutions. So as we move into this problem, the strategy we're going to talk about is by factoring. So one of the things we learn in math is factoring means things are connected by multiplication. So if you have 2 things connected by multiplication, how do we get 0? In other words, if you have something here, what can you multiply something by to get 0? Well, that something has to be 0. So remember, the only way in multiplication to get 0 is one of the factors has to be 0. So they make this statement that says if you have a times b is equal to 0, what you can say then, for this to be true, a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0. So when we have a quadratic equation, the strategy is going to be to set the equation equal to 0. We're going to factor the left side of the equation, and then we're going to set each factor equal to 0 by applying this property over here, a equals 0, b equals 0. And then we're going to solve each one of these little linear equations to get x by itself. So if I look at this first equation, I have this x squared minus this 15x is equal to 0. To factor it, remember the first thing we look for is a GCF. And notice how both of these terms have an x in common. So I'm allowed to actually factor an x out. So when I factor an x out of x squared, that leaves me an x. If you factor an x out of the 15x, that just leaves you the 15. So the minus 15 there. So if I double check it, x times x is x squared, x times negative 15 is negative 15x. So that's going to be the factored form. So notice how this x is actually going to be the a, and this x minus 15 is actually going to be the b. So those are our 2 factors. So we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So we're going to set x equal to 0, and then we're going to set x minus 15 equal to 0. And we're going to solve for x. Well, notice how the first equation is already solved for x. So 0 would be a solution. Now to solve this one for x, notice how the negative 15 has to go to the other side. So one of the things we learned is when you move things to the other side of the equation, all that happens is the sign changes. So if I move this negative 15 over here, this becomes x equals 15. And that's a quicker way to solve the problem, is just pay attention to that little pattern there. So if you move something from one side of the equation to the other, all that really happens is the sign changes. That's the same thing as adding a 15 on both sides, if you will. So if I had x minus 15 is equal to 0, you could have added 15 to both sides to get x by itself. And notice how that still gives me x equals 15. So a shortcut is if you move something to the other side of the equation, we just change its sign. So the solutions here would be then 0 would be a solution and 15 would be a solution. If you want to double check this, you could put 0 into this equation. So it's going to be 0 squared minus 15 times 0. Well, we know 0 squared is 0. 15 times 0 is 0, and 0 minus 0 is 0. So that is a solution because it does give me the same thing as the right-hand side, which is 0. If I want to check the 15 squared minus 15, and I'm going to replace this x with the 15 as well. Notice that you also get 0. So those are the 2 solutions to the equation. So degree 2 equation can have up to 2 solutions. And notice how they do say type an integer or simplified fraction. Use a comma to separate answers as needed. So since we had 2 answers, we separate those by a comma.